Hello, everybody. You are listening to the Trifecta, where UFOs, the paranormal, and cryptids collide, the official podcast of Rocky Mountain Ranch Research. I am your host, Katie Paige. I hope all of you are doing wonderful out there and having more wonder than worry this week so far. Tonight, I have an exciting guest. I have Ben Moss, and we are going to do a deep dive on Socorro and some new evidence that has been discovered, as well as some cases that I feel or Ben feels that is connected to the Socorro case. I think it's one of the best UFO cases out there. So I'm looking forward to having Ben on here in a minute. Just a couple quick reminders. The holidays are coming. So if you feel generous and you want to support the show, you can always go to Patreon, RMRR, Rocky Mountain Ranch Research, this abbreviation. There's different levels on our Patreon page. There we have it. And as well as Rocky Mountain Ranch Research.org. I just added some cool new product. It was with the updated logo. So, and also if you have any questions for Ben during our live show, please make sure you put your questions in uppercase so we know that they're questions. And without further ado, let's bring in Ben Moss from back east. How you doing, Ben?
Doing good. It's getting cold. Don't like the cold.
Really? I think I saw an article on 9 News saying Colorado's getting one of the latest snows in record. So it's been like unseasonably warm here. So, but it's coming. I know. You haven't had snow there yet, have you?
No, but I saw it was snowing in Hawaii.
Oh, all right. So things are changing globally. So Ben comes to us from all the way in Virginia. Correct? Yep.
Yep. Not far from DC.
Yeah. So for people who don't know Ben Moss's background, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about, how and when you got involved in these topics of ufology?
Well, I started as a kid. I saw a show with my father, Walter Cronkite special on UFOs, and that hooked me. And I was a big comic book collector. And when I started, I'd go to my favorite shop to get comics. I started seeing UFO magazines and started grabbing those. And, wish I had some of those copies now because they had photos I haven't seen since. But eventually got involved with MUFON, was a field investigator, then the chief field investigator for Virginia, and met Tony and he became assistant state director. Was with them for years, and then Tony and I formed the UFO guys, and we started working on our own cases and got involved with the Socorro case after we promised James Fox that we would grab this film that I'd seen on TV, and that was an excursion. But so we've been an investigator for a long time. Tony and I wrote the Socorro book, and that's on Amazon now. And met Ray Stanford, and Ray Stanford was the original investigator of Socorro, invited down by Dr. Hynek. So, it's been, I've really been interested in it. I remember in the 90s, I think 99, I was security at the MUFON symposium at Crystal City. And that was pretty cool because I kind of got an idea of what, being around like-minded people, kind of like when we were recently at Snippy. So,
right.
Yeah.
That was an awesome time. It was great seeing you out here for that. And you bring up something interesting. Tony and I, we were just watching Sean Ryan. He's doing this special on PsyOps. And you mentioned your comic books and DC Comics. And I know you're a big fan of DC Comics. But I was surprised. He mentioned a documentary, which it was hard to find, but I ended up finding it on a library site, of a show called Theaters of War, which talks about film and like the comic books. And you mentioned, seeing UFOs. Do you think, Ben, that we have been spoon-fed aliens, UFOs, and ETs as part of the Pentagon government, part of the whole cover-up? Or is that just kind of hi, Stargazer, thanks for being here?
Well, in the past, all the way up through the 70s, people that were interested in the subject were kooks or hallucinating or doing drugs or whatever. And so when it got serious, especially recently, the government, it's interesting because I have not a popular take on disclosure, which I think is the myth that'll never happen. But it just seems like as the years go by, whatever the group is that you'll never know their names and never know who they are, that really knows the secrets and has the footage and the material and probably the bodies from Roswell, they're never going to let it go. And so the thing about the hearings that's interesting is Congress, it's almost like when I started investigating UFOs, they're just getting into it. They don't really know anything. And they're baffled as to why they can't get the information. Like, what, 40 years.
Isn't it frustrating? You just want to jump through the screen and go, learn your history.
The fact that they're surprised that they're not getting it doesn't surprise researchers that have been doing this a long time, because it's a tightly held secret. And I think the reason is because it's a secret that might freak people out. So I just don't think there'll ever be disclosure. And the new movies coming out, I know there's a lot of talk and people are excited, but the reality is that 25 years from now, we'll still be talking about disclosure. So
I agree. I agree with you. There's so many different reasons. Tony's writing a new book on all the reasons why disclosure, probably we won't see it, at least not in the way people hope we'll see it anyway. So the Socorro case, 1965, is that right? Do I have the 64. Year right? 1964. 1964 Socorro case. This was kind of the case that really turned J. Allen Hynek around, in his mind. But what was compelling to you about this case, which made you believe that it wasn't a hoax? Like, this is a really important case that really anybody who's interested in this topic should know a lot about the Lonnie Zamora case.
Well, when we first started digging into it after we listened to the James Fox talk at the 2014 MUFON Symposium, and then I'd seen that footage of the woman who had gone through right after, and we started digging. Then we got hooked up with Ray Stanford, and we read, his Socorro Salsa and Pentagon Pantry, a very detailed, very well done investigation along with Dr. Hynek. And, this is the case that Dr. Hynek pushed him to form Center for UFO Studies, CUFOS. And even Hector Quintanilla, the head of the Project Blue Book, was like peed off that he couldn't solve the case. He got a top secret clearance. He thought he was going to find this egg-shaped craft in a hangar somewhere, and he never found it. But it's funny that he said, well, we never figured out where it came from, but the vehicle wasn't alien. I'm like, the vehicle that landed in the middle of the desert with a blue flame, who has that kind of technology in 1964 even now? So that he actually said vehicle is funny, because it's still an unknown in the Project Blue Book files, because there was nothing attached to any dark project or black project or any other country or anything. We still don't fly egg-shaped craft today that have a blue flame to lift it off the ground and then it turns silent, hovers, and can reach supersonic speed. So egg shape is, it's moving fast. It'll look like a tic tac. So maybe it's related to the tic tacs. I have no idea.
I find that interesting. And even, using the UFO decks for this little segment, Encounters, looking back at these cases from the 1960s, 1970s, sometimes into the 50s, people are talking about these egg-shaped craft. And of course, we all know, the whole White Sands missile range, the state of New Mexico in general, especially in these early years, was just a hot spot for good reason. And I'll let you talk about why that reason might be. Just UFOs everywhere, not to mention the 47 Roswell case. So why don't you kind of start, for our listeners who aren't really up to speed on the Socorro case, kind of give us the 60-second version of what happened with Lonnie Zamora that day.
Yeah, Lonnie Zamora, who, we got to know his family. He was a real honest police officer in Socorro, New Mexico. Never even thought about UFOs probably his whole life. Chasing a speeder that he knew. He was kind of behind it. I don't think the speeder knew he was on him. And then he heard a roar and saw kind of a blue flame flying over, going to his right into the desert, and broke off the chase in his brand new cruiser. It took him 3 tries to get up this hill, which Tony and I beat a rental car up going up the hill. But he crested the hill, and he's looking out the left side, and he thinks he sees an overturned van or maybe an airplane. He couldn't really figure out what was going on. And as he got closer, he saw two things in white coveralls, and I think he saw more detail in that. But they were standing, looking under the craft, like your good diagram there, and they were only as tall as the greasewood bushes in the area, which only grow to 4 feet. And as Ray had pointed out in the past, there's no aviation program we have that uses small people to fly aircraft. And so he as he got closer, he heard two slams. The creatures had jumped back inside this egg-shaped craft that had a symbol on it on four legs. And then as he approached it, a roar came out. He hit the dirt. He turned around and looked, saw the symbol, the inverted V with 3 bars. And the craft lifted up on a blue flame. It hovered for a second. The flame went out, and it's sitting there, making no noise at all. There was a wind up and a wind down like you'd hear on a generator. And then it barely cleared the dynamite shack going southwest, and then eventually reached what they thought was supersonic speed, kind of went like this, and then boom, like that. So the whole incident was less than 3 minutes, but left a lot of evidence. Lonnie Samora was, later in life was sad to even mention it. He's just was sick of the thing after, because it shattered his world. Devout Catholic, man of the cloth, a real nice guy, a real good gentleman. And he sees something like that, would flip anybody out, but especially a person that had no interest in UFOs, had never thought about aliens, had never believed. I think he might have thought they were demons, being a Catholic, but the impression I get is that he saw their faces, and that's what convinced him that they weren't human. And so the case left a lot of evidence. Hynek was on the site fairly quickly. Captain Holder, I talked to one of his sons recently. He was the White Sands Uprange commander. He showed up. FBI showed up, although they said later, don't say we were there, but they were there. And it turns out he had a pretty big background with UFOs. When I talked to his son, he had, been part of when tanks were starting to fire off nuclear warheads, and then we were putting nuclear warheads on ICBMs. He had been moving around the country to all these locations, but he said every time the ICBMs were loaded with nuclear weapons, UFOs would show up, and they actually had a couple of pilots that disappeared and never were heard from again. And that never made the news. And this was in the 50s into the early 60s. So he was already a veteran, and he was very meticulous. That's the thing his son told me. And he's the one that measured the 4 indentations of the wedge-shaped landing gear. He's the one that saw what looked like paw prints. I think the gear that the creatures were wearing, there was like 8 prints as they came out of the vehicle looking under it and then got back in because I think it was having mechanical difficulty. Metal was scraped on a rock from one of the landing gear that Ray Stanford discovered.
You have a picture of that one right there. That's the metal scrapings right there.
And that's clearly, even though it's a black and white photo, that's clearly a type of metal. It's not
right
sand like they said. It's not, they had it analyzed, and apparently at first they said it's the alloys were not of the chart of this solar system, even though it was like nickel and magnesium and
Did
iron.
they ever get that tested, or do we have access to any of that now? Can we find some remnants of that?
It was tested at Goddard, and apparently it was, metal. When you have any metals from outside of the solar system, has a different isotopic ratio. So, and that's what these had. But then at Goddard, they said the guy who was testing it told Ray it was unusual, and then he disappeared because he got sent to the woodshed. We found out for investigating this. And then the rock that I was trying to find after Ray passed away several months ago, there was the rock that they had taken told Ray they'd only take half. They took all of the metal. But with today's type of technology, I'm sure there's little microscopic pieces left in this thing. Mm-hmm. And
did Ray keep one of the rocks? Yeah,
he had the exact rock that we showed. The metal was scraped. The gear kind of scraped down this metal and set down this rock and left some metal. But since Ray passed, the Smithsonian Institute has been in his house. There's been a lot of people cataloging the dinosaur tracks and all the rocks that were there. So can't find it anywhere. I know what it looks like. I've been there 3 times now, spent about 8 hours there each time. Got a lot of good data, especially the Socorro stuff, but can't find the rock. And I think it's still there. His wife Sheila says it's in a bag. So,
oh man, we gotta tear that place apart and find.
Well, it has a safe, and if it's in the safe, nobody knows the combination. So.
Oh no! I know that you and Tony spent hours and hours and years
Yeah.
hundreds of hours with Ray Stanford, who not only investigated this case, but isn't there like a lot of cases now that you have access to that you're going to just take do a deep dive and look at all this data that he has? I'm sure that there's going to be some gems that you might find in there. But I mean, so, the metal on the rock, that is compelling as it is. But what other evidence was left around the scene and that they documented with photographs? Because I mean, this is what blows my mind. People talk about, well, there's no evidence of UFOs. Well, when it comes to the Socorro case and others, and the Snippy case, and I thought it was cool when we found that picture of Lonnie Zamora,
Right.
comparing the cast to the Snippy case from 1967. How cool is that? Even though they didn't match, they still could be somewhat connected. But there are cases in ufology that have evidence. So what other things were left behind at the scene at Socorro?
Well, we think the same craft landed at La Madera 2 days later and repaired itself because it was on the ground for 8 hours. There were 3 other cases we found. One was South Hill, Virginia. One was at a canyon. I can't remember the name, but a guy did a really good analysis on YouTube, and this analysis was also done by Dr. Heineck. But the 4 indentations of this wedge-shaped gear, even though the distance between the 4 was different, the center of gravity was still right where the blue flame played out. And so the machine was self-leveling so that no matter how far apart the different landing gear was, they were all supporting the same weight. And this guy did a lot of math to figure that out. And in these other cases, the same thing. This thing was self-leveling. The gear might have even been able to morph into different shapes because one landed on a hard surface, a street, and this one landed on uneven terrain in the desert. But it left the impressions that Dr. Heineck estimated were a 9-ton vehicle, and it came in at an angle, left at an angle. It left the metal on the rock. The blue flame, which only played out when it landed and exited, just kind of played along the ground for seconds. It vitrified sand.
Did it turn like blue? Is that what that means? Like when you
blue knifing flame, yeah.
Like makes it into glass?
Yeah, it did. It turned the glass, it vitrified it, so it turned the sand into glass, which, an experiment takes 2,200 degrees, 30 minutes to do that. And this was seconds. There was Ted Jordan, one of the police officers, took a bunch of photos, which the government confiscated, said he'd get back. They told him they wouldn't give it back because the film was fogged by radiation. And so the greasewood bush was burned in half, and those are very resinous bushes. It would take a blowtorch, 10 minutes to do with that.
Right. Also, we have pictures. I put it in the presentation. I think you saw it at Snippy, Ben, when you were there, how similar those Chico brushes and the brushes are at the Socorro. It's almost identical. If you put the pictures up there comparing, you couldn't tell which was Socorro and which one was Snippy. So you're right. I mean, and they're like in half and they're burned. And I wonder if they ever checked for any burned roots at the Socorro case. But so they had the landing gear left marks, and those were all measured. I think that's really cool that they can estimate by that how heavy this craft may have been. But weren't there also little footprints found?
Yeah, they were kind of like, they've been called paw prints. They were kind of like a horseshoe. They were only out for a second looking at the craft. The thing is, if Lonnie had been chasing a speeder and seen this thing, they probably would have sat there for hours and did whatever the repairs were, because when Lonnie saw them, they were looking up under the craft. But
were there any ever ideas of what might have been wrong? Was it a leg or a landing gear? Or nobody had any theories on that? No idea? Okay.
There was a rumor that, it's funny, James Fox heard the same thing through different sources, and Tony and I found the same thing, that there was a computer board found on the site that was very advanced, and that a lot of engineers, work in Socorro because of the engineering school there. But there was an advanced computer board found, and and then the rumor was that Lonnie had picked something up, put it in his pocket. When I talked to his daughter, it turns out they had gone out in the 90s, I think, or maybe early 2000s, and his house was robbed. And she said there were a lot of hiding places in the house, and Lonnie might have hid that if he had something there, but they got robbed and nothing of value was taken, but somebody was looking for something and maybe found it. But
Mm.
Yeah, it's just the prints at La Madera were much more numerous. They walked all the way around trying to fix this thing, and there was
Did they match the prints at the Socorro case?
everything was the same. The landing gear was wedge shaped. The measurements were the same. The blue flame was the same. What's interesting is in Socorro, it was a blue flame down the middle, and at La Madera, the guy said there were portholes around it with blue flame coming out of all the portholes. And a guy named Baca in Socorro, I think a 14-year-old kid, did a drawing of the Socorro craft based on Lonnie's description. But in that drawing, there's all these portholes around the bottom, which supports what the guy saw at La Madera. So it's just weird that nobody really drove down on Lonnie about, exactly what the craft looked like. What did the landing gear look like? I think he was just so freaked out. He just remembered the creatures more than anything. But so that's the symbol that was on it, the inverted V with 3 bars that when James Fox and Ray Stanford went to the National Archives, they found Hynek's original drawing. And this is Ray's drawing, but it was probably closer to the top left. The one in the middle is the fake one. Actually, it's more the one below the one on the top left. But
for our listeners that really don't know the story of the symbol, kind of walk us back and tell us about the symbol, why that might have been changed, what was reported, what was documented, and all of that. So,
yeah, you can see in this picture the Spanish, because most of these guys spoke Spanish, were of Spanish heritage, but the Spanish translates to a V with a bar at the top, bar at the middle, bar at the bottom. So the one on the far right, the halo over the kind of the arrow, that's the one. And in talking to Captain Holder's son, the main investigator from White Sands, branch commander, I found out that it's the FBI agent that probably changed the symbol so that if anybody else reported seeing this egg-shaped craft and reported the fake symbol, they'd know they were just full of crap. And so because Captain Holder was so rigorous and detailed and a very honest man, I believe when I talked to his son that the FBI agent made up the symbol, told Lonnie to sign it as a duty to his country and not discuss, which he did later. He kind of verified the inverted V with 3 bars, but Captain Holder was pretty pissed off about having to toe the line and tell a lie. That just tells you the nature of his character. He was a good, honest man, just like Lonnie. Lonnie was probably not happy about saying this is the symbol I saw. But later in life, there was a friend, Patrick Richard, that did the painting that hangs in the old Socorro police station, which is a museum now of Lonnie's Mora. And he had gone to Lonnie with a napkin with several symbols drawn on it and just said, Lonnie, which one is closer to the truth? And Lonnie pointed to the one with the inverted V with the bar at the top, bar at the middle, and bar at the bottom. So there's a lot of confirmation that was the real symbol. What the symbol means, I always thought it was a radiation warning because it pointed right to where the blue flame came out. It could have mean, don't stand here, you'll get cooked, or Tony suggested it might have meant eat at Joe's, but
the door is here in case you can't find it.
Yeah, so the symbol was, I was so happy to talk to Captain Holder's son because I got a lot more details and how the FBI agent was hanging around a lot and kind of, directing how he wanted this investigation to go. But the whole time saying, don't tell anybody I was here. But some of the paperwork I found at Ray's house showed that some back and forth between the FBI and Captain Holder. They mentioned the burns, the vitrified sand. They mentioned they got plant samples. They took samples of the sand. They took samples of the plant. Those tests have never been revealed, probably for a good reason, because they found it was anomalous. But just a really good case. Hynek, I said, was one of the best close encounters of the third kind. And then the landing in La Madera kind of verifies it. And in Leavittsville, there was a 200-foot wide egg-shaped craft that landed in the street that police officers saw. The whole town saw it, and that was in 1957. And then, we found all these newspaper articles in this time frame up and down that, that Route 66, I think it is. There were egg-shaped craft seen everywhere. It landed at Hollerman. Air Force pilots saw it in the sky. And so these things were around a lot.
Yeah, even in Canada. I've been pulling out old reports from that time period from Canada. Egg-shaped craft are seen there as well. Funny story before I bring this image down. funny story about this fake symbol. They put it out there to kind of know, like, okay, if anybody else sees a symbol, we can know, like, they're hoaxing or they're a copycat or whatever. So when Tony and I were doing the deep dive on the Snippy case, because of, the finally we have access to the old APRO Aerial Phenomena Research Organization documents. And in there, in the Snippy report, there was, of all people, a pastor, right, who was claiming to see multiple craft and strange things happening in the San Luis Valley, reported seeing a craft with what symbol? The fake Socorro symbol. And Tony got a good laugh out of that, because he's like, the one place that this fake symbol pops up is in the Snippy case, and it's from a pastor. So
Right.
there you have it. Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny because the original, the El Defensor Chieftain, the newspaper in Socorro, prints twice. It prints on I think Tuesday and Friday, and the event happened on Friday, so it didn't print again until Tuesday. But when they printed it, it had the correct symbol, and Baca had drawn the correct symbol on his drawing. And the FBI said erase that, and so the picture actually has an erase symbol. They put the fake one on later, but the correct symbol got out in the press, and then they had to backtrack it, and then the Blue Book files that Rob Mercer found on Craigslist and shared with me, it shows that in the internal notes they had the inverted V with 3 bars, and and all the bad spelling from all the agents involved. And so, Holder was called years later from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They were still trying to figure it out. The president was involved. So you have an incursion like that in between Alamogordo and Holloman Air Force bases. Yeah. They really want to know what it was, and they never figured it out. And it wasn't a student hoax. It wasn't the lunar lander.
Were there other witnesses, Ben, to this event?
Yeah, a family of man and wife with 3 boys in the back of the car stopped at Opal Grinders gas station and said, this thing almost took the roof off my car. And Opal Grinders said, was it a helicopter? And the guy said, it was a helicopter. It's a funny looking one. He said, what happened? He said, well, then I saw a police officer going to where it disappeared behind the hill. So he saw Liney going towards it. There were a couple of brothers that saw it from a different angle on the road. There were 3 people that called in before this happened, the night it happened, from Albuquerque, that said, look, there's some blue object flying towards Socorro. So 3 different people called into the radio dispatch about 5:15. This event happened at about 5:45. So multiple witnesses. And then when you looked at all the newspaper articles about egg-shaped craft, they were seen all over the place.
Right. Yeah. And then, I mean, the response that this got from, the interest of this case, if there was nothing to it, I mean, okay, the one rumor I remember hearing, like, oh, it's nothing to see here. It's just a NASA, like, lunar module or something, lunar lander or something like that, which is preposterous to me. But can you talk about why that explanation doesn't work?
Well, you wouldn't test a top secret lunar lander, a very expensive piece of equipment, in a public desert. You would do it at Holloman, which is where it was tested. At the time, it was being dropped from a Bell helicopter to test the integrity of the struts, but didn't have an internal engine at that point. And it used what's called a hydroxine, which sees the engine up after every use. But when you dig into the lunar lander, it only flew once in atmosphere. And the video's on YouTube. It got up, and this was the main pilot for the Apollo mission, but it got up and it started swinging, and he was losing control. And then it started coming down. He ejected, and then 200 feet later, it blew up on the ground. And that was the only time they tested an atmosphere, because 1, the engine would seize up, but 2, it's designed to fly in a vacuum, not an atmosphere. So they never flew it but one time in atmosphere on Holloman Air Force Base. And then that's what's so amazing about the Apollo mission. They didn't test a lot, and everything had to go right for them not to stay on the moon forever. And it did, even though they almost tipped over. I mean, so many things could have gone wrong, but just a testament to the pilots and the astronauts and the scientists and engineers. So it wasn't a lunar lander. It wasn't a student hoax. During that time frame, students were in exams. You couldn't put all this stuff together to create a student hoax. So the guy that said,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Sterling Colgate said he knew students that had created a hoax. And when I dug into his background, he was like, he was a little sketchy. He used to, party with the students and smoke pot with them. And, the two students, there were three students he said were involved. One was dead. One didn't want to talk, but one did communicate with me. And he said, I don't know why Sterling threw us under the bus. We had nothing to do with it. It was exam week. How are you going to go out in the middle of the desert, pull Lonnie out there, create all this evidence?
Yeah.
It's just ludicrous. So people try to explain it to make themselves feel better about, there's no aliens. But the only solution we could come up with was it just wasn't something made on this earth.
Yeah. I mean, does Lonnie have any living descendants? And have you ever been able to interview any of his descendants or family members?
Yeah.
What do they say about it?
I talked to his daughter. His daughter confirmed that what Ray had told us, that when Lonnie, because Ray had written a book and sent it to Lonnie, Socorro's also in the Pentagon pantry, and Ray had told us that Lonnie had looked at the book when Diane asked him about it, because he didn't talk about it. He didn't bring it up. If he brought it up, sure, but Lonnie didn't want to bring it up that much. But when his daughter asked about it, he just pointed to Ray's book in his bookshelf and said, "That's the only guy that got it right." And so there's other people in the family might know a little more, but they don't want to talk. And so that's fine. I mean, I have enough evidence to know it was a real event. And the La Madera, that, the more I've dug into that, the more documents I've found, that was a longer event. But the guy saw it, went inside, told his parents. They're like, you're making that up. They were watching TV, because he was sent out to make sure the wild horses weren't eating their vegetables. And he said, yes, things egg shape on the ground, long as a telephone pole, blue flame coming out of multiple portholes at the bottom. Came out a couple hours later, was still out there, but he wasn't interested. But at that site, there was a big burn area. Tony was able to get the color film from Dave Marler, sent it to me from the archives in Albuquerque. But that had melted a bottle, a green, not a Mr. Pibb, but maybe a 7-Up or something.
Or like Mountain Dew.
Yeah, Mountain Dew. That's what
Mountain Dew.
But melting a bottle of glass is not easy.
What do you think the blue flame represents as far as a propulsion system on these craft? I mean, the fact that it goes silent and we couldn't have done that in 1964. But what is a blue flame?
I think it either was what they used to land and take off, like we have some craft that use almost like the Harrier jet that turns its engines down to land and then, does a different type of propulsion with it when it flies. But I think the blue flame, Ray would say it was subatomic particles released at the speed of light into the ground to provide thrust. But we don't know of a blue flame that Lonnie got within 50 feet of. If it was a propellant, it would have cooked him. But it was warm, but it didn't burn him. And the fact that this blue flame that was maybe 2 feet in diameter could lift a 9-ton craft tells you it's some kind of exotic propulsion. We have no idea. And then for that to cut off and there's this wind down, tells you, well, whatever mechanical difficulties that they got over it at that point, and then we're able to take off. Because when it almost hit the car, they said it was really kind of having some problem keeping altitude. But it almost hit the dynamite shack, which was only 8 feet tall. Lonnie said it cleared it by maybe 2 feet. So they were still trying to figure it out. And that's why they landed 100 miles away at La Madera and were on the ground for a while to repair it. And
did Lonnie say that when he saw these little beings outside of the craft working on this thing, were they wearing any kind of helmets or oxygen or anything like that? Or could they just breathe regularly?
It was vague for a reason. It's funny because his boss, Sergeant Chavez, kept the whole time he thought it was a black project. We're pretty sure he saw the craft too, but he never admitted to it because he thought, I can't talk about a black project. I'll be put in prison. So Lonnie said something in white coveralls for a long time. But the fact that that night of the event, he went to his priest and spent hours talking to him about it because he was so upset about it, tells me that I think they had a suit on, and the kind of paw prints that are on the ground seems to be some type of foot gear. But I think he saw their faces, and that's what freaked him out, because think he got close enough to realize, and they're only 4 feet tall, but I think he saw enough to know they weren't human, because towards the end, I think it was on UFO Hunters or one of those shows, when they were interviewing, he did very few interviews. He kept calling them the creatures. And that tells me he knew they were creatures and not humans. He didn't say small, said they resembled small kids in stature, but he never said humans. He never said people. He started talking about the creatures.
So, that's interesting.
Yeah,
they must have been breathing our air if they didn't have an actual helmet or breathing apparatus on.
Yeah, they might have had a clear plexiglass, a clear, just like a helmet, like astronauts wear, where you could see the face. And maybe their features were a little bit abnormal, but yeah, it's just, his reaction is so powerful that, and he was disgusted with it at the end, because he didn't care if you believed him or not. He saw it. And I think that the details he never gave were much more precise, that he realized they were not human. And then his first thought was demons. And that's why he talked to us.
I mean, the fact that he went to see his pastor says a lot. Yeah. Did anybody else hear the roar of this?
A lot of people did. Yeah. A lot of people heard the roar. Phil Class went out
20, there. 40, 50, 100. I mean,
a lot of people, Ray said tens or scores of tens, but
wow. Okay.
A lot of people heard the roar. I think that the people that called from Albuquerque had heard the noise. I think, because it was making such a roar when Lonnie first encountered it, that it was having problems. The blue flame was engaged. And when it left, the blue flame wasn't engaged. And, it got up off of it, but then it turned it off like they made some kind of correction. But yeah, it's just a weird shape. There's not many cases that have an egg-shaped craft. So this was a photo that Ray took of the dynamite shack, and then we weren't.
Do I have the dynamite? I think this is the dynamite. Yeah, right there. Okay.
We couldn't talk about this until Ray had passed, but he had shared these photos, and then I got more photos from his wife after he passed. But this is a picture he took of the dynamite shack in '64, maybe a week after the incident. And in 2000, somebody called him up and said, what was the name on the dynamite shack? Because if I could find because it had been dismantled, but he said, if I could find the dynamite shack, I might be able to see if the magnetic properties of the metal had been reversed, or if something was unusual or anomalous about the dynamite shack. So he blew up the picture to see if he could find a name on the shack, there is a name there. And then in the background, he noticed these 4 objects. And you can see the one on the left, definitely an egg shape. The one on the right, the back end of one of the egg shape with some type of energy signature, but you can see 3 of the 4 landing gear. And it looks just like Lonnie described it. The one in the middle, also egg shaped. The one in the background could be an inversion, a heat inversion from the mountain, but I think that these things were flying because of all the newspaper articles. These things were around a lot, and don't know what they were doing. But you can see that is clearly 3 of the landing gears displayed. I believe the person that one of the analysis that's looked at this photo said that craft was maybe a mile from the camera, and the other ones were much further away.
And this was taken how many days after the event?
About a week. So maybe April 29th or 30th.
So this thing is hanging around then for some reason. I mean, and we have the negative for this. Is that right, Ben, or are we still looking at
what happened was the negative, the one I thought had these images in it had a kid standing in front, a friend's son standing in front of the dynamite shack. And this is not that photo. So I found on my last trip to Ray's house, I found this photo that is just it's taken from a great distance. The dynamite shack is actually maybe 50 yards away. This is a blow up. But I don't have a negative because it's a Polaroid. But gotcha. The Polaroid, when I look under a magnifying glass, I can see the objects in the background. So I'm going to get a high DPI resolution, hopefully like 1200 DPI, so that I can blow this thing up and do exactly what Ray did to get these images out, but maybe with a bit more modern technology. But they're clearly there.
Yeah, yeah.
Ray didn't make this up. I mean, he didn't find this until 2000.
And wasn't Hynek with him? Did Hynek take pictures as well? And I
Hynek took pictures. We had I have that original also. We wish we had the one that Hynek was taking, because Ray took a picture of Lonnie's in the foreground and Hynek's to the right taking his picture, also with, I think, a Polaroid camera. But
Did you
in
ask
that,
Paul
in
about
that
that?
picture, in that picture, we had it in the presentation, I think, but in that picture, there's 3 or 4 objects that are also in the sky.
Wow. So okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. This is a lot. First of all, before I get on to this next question, did you ask Paul Hynek if perhaps he might have some of these photos from that day somewhere?
I've never, don't know him. I've never spoken with him.
I will ask him on your behalf.
Okay.
Hey, Paul. He's got to have a folder of Socorro stuff. Wouldn't that be amazing if you could correlate the Ray photos with the Hynek photos and they're showing the same thing? But what blows my mind about this, Ben, is what this suggests is that for a week or more, this craft is hanging around the area.
Yep.
I mean, with the beans. Now, first, the fact that there's beans at all, beings at all, is kind of interesting. Where do they come from? What planet are they from? How are they traveling? Or how did they travel that far in that little egg? Or are they living under our oceans, our caverns? What's in New Mexico? Where could they hide there? I don't know. What are your theories on this? Are they just hanging out? Were they broke down for this long? What's happening?
Yeah, because I mean, the one in Leavittsville in '57 was described as 200 yards across, and these were about 19 feet in length and about 6 feet in height. Because at La Madera, they said as long as the telephone poles are usually about 19 feet. So I think because there were so many, I think they probably came out of a bigger craft, and it just makes sense that even though these things had the ability to go supersonic with no sound, I think they probably all were ejected from another craft, because I've seen some really interesting documentation that shows that some of these craft might have been made from civilizations that no longer exist, but the purpose of them was to go explore the galaxies, find life, categorize it. They could be self-replicating and repairing themselves as they go along. Even though this one had creatures, I think a lot of these things are maybe AI or clones. But it seems like, they discovered we were here. And, just like we find other solar systems that have a sun and the planets are in the Goldilocks zone where it's not too hot, not too cold, there's probably water, that we're obviously here. And then, of course, when we started blowing up atomic bombs in '47.
Right. That would get their attention.
Right.
So like scouting craft, that makes sense to me. Like one of our scouting craft has had an issue. So maybe, they have other little scouts where they could come in. They're just trying to, maybe they hid the Socorro craft somewhere and they were just, could that be even possible that it was still not functioning quite right? They hid it somewhere and then had to come back and try to.
Well, there's so many mountains out there. It's a big area. There's areas where, nobody's even walked through. I think they could hide in a lot of places. And these things probably have the ability to go into water, or, it's just, sometimes you just can't wrap your head around what the technology is. But I think that whatever these things are, it's interesting, because when I talked to Captain Holder's son, his dad had, after this event, when he showed up on the interview on that show where Tony and I are having our presentation, where he says, I believe Lonnie was an honest person. I have no idea what that thing was. I don't know if it was ET or not. The day after that aired, he got a call from somebody that basically, we found out, said, if you ever talk about that again, your family and you are in a lot of trouble. Ooh. And he freaked him out. And so Captain Holder later was diagnosed with cancer and given 6 months to live. And so he told his sons all this kind of stuff. That ended up living 6 more years instead of 6 months. But he had a friend that had been killed under mysterious circumstances, and his friend had said he'd seen bodies in crafts. So just like with Roswell, you're threatening people with death if you talk about what you've seen if you've been close to these things, which tells you how big a secret it is. Another reason for no disclosure, because they're terrified of this information getting out. But the most interesting point of that was that Captain Holder had heard that we had talked to a civilization that said, you can travel anywhere in the solar system you want to, but do not leave the solar system or it will go badly, because we do not want your species traveling space, because we're so backwards and so ignorant of,
violent.
Yeah,
Tell us, we're violent. We're violent people. Tell us I can't believe we're already down to 15 minutes left of the show, but tell us a little bit about the Valençol case of France and how that's similar to the Socorro case. That's another biggie.
Yeah, that one, it's kind of like, I actually know more about the New York case, but France was very
two beings though on the Valençol?
I sometimes I confuse my info on that. I mean, the New York case, Madeira was 2 days later. The New York case was the next day before the news had come out. And this was a guy, a farmer, who was out in his field tending to, I think he was fertilizing things, his crop, and a white egg-shaped craft landed, same description. 2 short beings got out in white coveralls and talked to him. And he said, I can't remember, I think he said they talked in his head, they didn't verbally speak. But they were asking him what he was doing, and he was like, oh, run my crops, And he said he had gone up and touched the vehicle, and he thought it was going to be hot, but it was cool to the touch, because this was April. And the creature spoke to him and then said, hey, if you leave a bag of fertilizer out, we'll pick it up. And so the next day, that night, he put a bag of fertilizer out, and the next day the fertilizer was gone. But that was an interesting case. I think it was Gary Hill. And that was a day later. And a lot of the information hadn't come out yet, but he described the craft, the creatures, and everything pretty similarly. Just like in France, when you start hearing of other countries' cases in this time frame, you start hearing similar. I think there were a lot of these craft flying around at the time.
I know, that's why I love that we have access to AI now, because now we can see these cases much quicker and make these connections. Yeah. What happened to Lonnie Zamoro's career after all this? Did he stay on as an officer? Did he get ridiculed? I know you mentioned he, regretted ever coming forward. I don't blame the guy. Just like Travis Walton, he's like, oh my gosh, it wrecked his, I wouldn't say wrecked his whole life, but it certainly affected his whole entire life. So what happened to his career? Did he stay on as an officer? Or?
Well, he stayed on a little bit longer, but he got a lot of ridicule. He was known as the UFO cop, who was seeing things, and he was, they called him a drunk. But Lonnie didn't. Lonnie had had a beer maybe 2 months before this. He wasn't a drinker. I believe he drank a little bit more after this event, but that's understandable.
Who wouldn't?
But it's just one of those things where he was so disgusted that he got all these calls from all over the world to go do interviews, and he did very few interviews. But as the interviews progressed, he started talking more and more like he had seen aliens. That's what was really interesting. And I believe that there was a civilization, these things come in waves. I think this civilization, whoever they were that came through our solar system, had egg-shaped craft, and that's why they popped up all over the world, and and kind of then we're gone for a while. But now with the Tic Tacs, very similar, very similar.
Yeah. So this book, Socorro UFO, you can get it on Amazon. Check out UFO Guys as well. But after, you've been on this case and doing a deep dive on it for so many years. And I know this, after everything you've seen, all the documents, all the time you've spent with Ray Stanford, what makes this one of the most important cases in your opinion? And what are a couple others that are equally as important that most people, if they're new to this field, should know about?
Well, there was so much evidence, and the fact that there was so much interest from the president, Joint Chiefs of Staff. You had very credible people, Captain Holder, Upper Range Commander from White Sands, FBI agent. You had a lot of people, Dr. Hynek, that really knew how to investigate cases, and they were just baffled. And there's a lot of times when, they might figure it out, or they might say this evidence was false, or the cases fall apart when you really dig into them. But as we dug into this, and as the original investigators did, there was just more and more evidence that this was very unusual and anomalous. And so uh, the more I've dug, and we visited Socorro 3 times, we kept getting more info. We had another witness that said it flew by her house when she was drinking a beer on her porch and made a turn from the Rio Grande coming down to where the people that were at Opal Greenwich gas station saw it. So I think other cases, I mean, the South Hill, Virginia was an interesting one because it landed on the highway, blocked a police officer, and put 4 holes in the blacktop surface of the street, and was self-leveling. They figured out the thing was, even though the distances weren't the same, it was each strut was supporting the weight. 4 struts.
When was that? I don't know about that case. When was that approximately?
That was like 1962.
Really? Wow.
And then there was another one at a reservoir, and Golden Canyon was the other one. Same thing. A woman saw an egg-shaped craft. When it flew over her car stopped. So electromagnetic pulse probably cut her engine off. Levisville was a really famous one because in '57, this whole town, there was a call into the police station, and they're like, yeah, another drunk person. Then they got another call. And that's when they realized that people were seeing it. So the police went out and they saw this craft. It was landing on a highway, blocking a highway. And so you had, in that case, I think 1,000 witnesses to a 200-foot egg-shaped craft. And, it's just, I think that's a good one to look into. La Madera is an interesting case to look into. The New York case in '64 is an interesting one.
Have you ever thought about like doing a whole book on nothing but egg-shaped craft? I mean, you could do one like 50s, 60s, 70s, egg-shaped craft sightings only. Maybe Preston Dennett's done it. I don't know. Preston Dennett has a whole heck of a lot of books, but I'm saying this should be just specifically because, by the way, Ben, what did you think of that egg-shaped footage that just kind of went viral a few months back?
Which one? It
was like the big egg shape that was like being hoisted down.
That looked like somebody lifting an egg with a string on a fake.
So you didn't think it was legit?
The green surface that was at putt-putt when you went to putt-putt. That was 100% BS in my opinion. 100%. Boogosphere hoax. Alien mummies hoax. Atlas is a spaceship. It's a comet. It's like, gosh.
What do you think these storylines tell us about what's going on? Is there going to be like a false flag event in our near future here? Are we working our way up to that? Is that what this is all about?
With the way the world's going right now, I don't think so. I just think that the powers that be, like I said, that Pentagon, Congress, they don't know who they are. They'll never know their names. They're very secretive. Eisenhower and Truman both warned us about black projects that got so black that nobody knows what they do and where their billions of dollars come from. That exists today. So I just think that they'll keep creating these rabbit holes. These hearings in front of Congress, in a way, are laughable to me because you might have, and a lot of them are third party saying weren't actual witnesses. Some of them were. And I believe everything they're saying, but it doesn't get you any closer. It's just more stories. And so until somebody comes out with a body and a spaceship, there's not going to be disclosure.
What happened if a Socorro landing happened today? What do we have in our arsenal that might, if something like that happened today, that would just blow it open, right?
Well, you'd have multiple people filming it because of the cell phones, and maybe if they have I have a physics toolbox on my phone, so you can get magnetic readings and gravimeter and magnetron readings. But once again, if you filmed an egg-shaped craft landing from 5 different angles, then the government coming out and say, "Oh, that was one of our advanced drones."
Right.
Because all the drone sightings recently, somebody came out and said, "No, those were military drones."
Right.
Those were unusual.
Ross Coulthart, I think, basically went on record saying, "No, that's ours." Just like our comment here from 111. Love that angel numbers. Love the angel numbers. That's an important one. Could they be our government? Meaning, what makes you believe that the Socorro craft in particular might not be our government, or do you think it could be our government, or do you think our government knows and continues to hide it? I mean, but
Not in 64. There's no way it was our government. And for people to come out now and say Lockheed Martin has built this tic-tac shaped craft that was the one that Faber saw, that's just another misdirection. That's just another rabbit hole. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that we have anything that can accelerate from a standstill to off the horizon in less than a second, because that thing on radar went from 80,000 feet to a foot above the ocean in less than a second. Right. There's nothing we have that can produce a shell of anti-gravity to keep the thing from crashing against itself.
And the fact that this photo was taken a week later,
64.
In 1964, a week later after the Socorro landing. I mean, that's it. That looks like, I mean, the fourth leg must be hidden behind or something, because we can only see the three legs.
And no evidence of propulsion, no plume, no chemical rocket exhaust, nothing like that. Because if it was one of ours, you'd see something that shows the type of propulsion.
Do you think this little hole here might be like where the blue flame came out, or?
I think that's an energy source. Okay. There's no other reason for that to light up like that, because it's in the sun, which seems to be to the left. But I think that's some type of energy.
And you mentioned that the craft in Virginia mentioned, we hear sometimes that these craft you think would assume would be hot to the touch,
right,
especially with a blue flame. But I've heard that they actually can be very cold. I think that was in the Stefan Mahalik case in Canada. I think he said it was cold, even though it burnt him.
Many cases are like that. I think it's the ceramic or the material is able to absorb energy in such a way that you could put a blowtorch on it and still touch it, and it's not hot. It's exotic material. The material that I've heard that Bigelow and others have investigated, it seems to have been built on a molecule by molecule, which is something we can't do right now. But if you can build something on that level and put all these different types of alloys into it, then you can build something super strong that could be just like at Roswell, thin as a cigarette pack, but you can't dent it with a sledgehammer or set it on fire.
Yeah. With only 3 minutes left, why do you think we're not seeing these types of encounters anymore, these landings, broken down craft that were reported heavily in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, actually, into the late 70s? Why do you think that's changed?
Well, because we have more technology to record things now. There was a crash outside of Area 51 recently that they're saying was really weird. There were some crashes, 97 in Russia, Brazil, 99. I just think they're aware of our technology. And so they're in the water a lot where you can't really see them. And so that, and these things, if they can fly through space, they can fly through the water with no problem. So, the ocean is the most unexplored part of this planet. There's many places you could hide when you're talking about, 5 miles deep or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So tell us, Ben, what you're up to now. This new version of Socorro UFO just came out, but what do you have going on with your research right now?
Just trying to, I was trying to get some of Ray's footage digitized, but it seems like there's another group that has already done that. And I won't mention any names, but apparently from the lab that I had taken that negative to get that analyzed, a lab that does a lot of work for major organizations and converting video and old video to digitized. But apparently they were really impressed by what they saw in this footage. And then the people who did it, I can't say anything because one person doesn't want his name out there, but let's just say that they know their profession, they know their stuff when it comes to aeronautical objects, and that what these videos show is exactly what Ray had been describing. It's just a mothership with objects coming out of it, and a film from '77. So hopefully the videos that are digitized now will see the light of day, or I can get a copy because the world needs to see that.
I was going to say, if there's a lesson here to be shared with anybody who's listening, the viewers, and thank you all for being here tonight, by the way, and thank you, Ben, for being here. But don't hold on to this information. Share it. That's what it's here for. It's for all of us to share and learn and grow and understand what's happening in our skies. So I want to encourage you, Ben, you're such a good investigator, and just to keep working with Ray's wife. And, Socorro wasn't the only case he had. So get it out to the people. And I hope that you continue to do that. And again, please check out the UFO guys on Facebook and follow along. I know you're good at posting things on there, and check out Socorro UFO. A lot of good documents in here. I mean, that's what I love about these publications is you show the documents.
Yep.
And for that reason alone, the book is worth it, just so you can visually see these documents. So keep up the great work. Thanks for being here. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. And next week on the Trifecta, we are going to have an interesting conversation with Kay Golden and her experiences with the Greys and her abduction story. So that should be an interesting one next week. I hope to see you guys there. Again, Ben, thanks so much. And
thanks a lot.
Next Wednesday. Good night, everybody.
Appreciate it.